Now that we got the avatar done, we are going to work on the shadows. As you see here, I already got started. I'm going to tell you exactly how to do this. What you need to do is create another layer and make that layer multiply. As you see here, you can change the opacity later depending on how dark a light you want the shadows. Taking your dropper brush, you want to pick the darkest part of the skin, and then a regular soft round brush, and begin to draw on your shadows where you want them. Don't worry about mistakes because you can come back and erase later. This is a separate layer, so it helps. Now I'm going to take a soft round brush at a low opacity, somewhere between 15 and 20, or 21 in this case, and I'm going to lighten some of the edges of these shadows. There we go. Individual strand shadows can be created by going back and using that individual pen and a darker color. You want to use a smaller size, like that. On a separate layer would be ideal beneath all this hair and shadows, because what you're going to do is you're going to blur this shadow once you've created it. Make sure that too is a multiply layer, and taper the end using your smudge. Now I'm going to slightly blur those shadows, and I'm going to drop the opacity. There we go. Voila, I have some hair shadows. You can do as many of these as you want. Also remember, you don't want to blur until it's at the very end of creating these shadows, so you don't have different types of blur. And we blur again, Gaussian blur. Okay, and drop the opacity. Now we've got some shadows in her hair. Now we've created a decent amount of shadows. You can go back, and if you don't like how light they are, you can change them by brightness and contrast. Dropping the brightness will darken, allowing the shadows to stand out more. Pulling the contrast up will also give them a darker look. Too light. If you want parts of your shadows to be lighter or darker than others, you want to use the low opacity brush to make that happen. Okay. I'm coming in now to refine my chin by pulling up the shadows and down the shadows, so that my chin sticks out as though there's light coursing across it. right now I'm just adding a few little details to make my picture feel more moving, more real. Kind of refining the hair and the facial features and pretty much anything detailed wise. There we go. All right. At this point, we're going to do the last bit of editing to the avatar before we go on, which is going to be highlighting. Depending on what we want to do or how we want these highlights to work, any facial features, for instance, we might want to change. In this instance, I'm going to make my young lady cry. So I'm going to take, just as I did with the hair, linear dodge, and I'm using skin tones again. Notice I put it beneath the hair and the shadows. This gives better realism. You have to make sure everything's layered exactly where it should be. I'm using the smudge tool to thin out the highlight here. And give her a little bit of a brow wrinkle. There we go. And now I'm going to work on the tears. Once again, another layer. You can add more highlights in other places as well, for instance right here on the eye. And then come back and use that low opacity eraser to blend it better. Another thing I do before I move on to the tears is sometimes if the eyes don't look real enough, I will pull this like that